Huh? Yeah. We need to get up. He hates it when you move them. Tell me when to go. Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Pam Pearson. I'm the director of the International Cryosphere Climate Initiative. We help to coordinate this meeting, this pavilion among the chaos in this pavilion section. I apologize for all of the noise around us, but hope that we're really going to have an excellent event that looks at some of the changes that have been observed and how to communicate these, and also the work of early career scientists. We have at these pavilions each week 4 early career cryosphere scientists who work as volunteers. Questions help to introduce most side events. And you're going to get a wonderful panel discussion with 3 or hopefully 4 of them. One is actually observing negotiations right now and is rushing back over here to get their take, why they went into science, and a little bit about what they perhaps have gotten out of COP27 so far. So without further delay, I wanted to introduce David Shukman, who's going to give a brief presentation about his travels and some of the work that he's done to communicate cryosphere science as a journalist and still today. So thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed for that. And then this is really a quick fire hit before we get to the main act, because there's nothing more inspiring than young researchers, and we want to hear their stories. So basically, as I mentioned before in the beginning of the previous session, it rapidly became clear to me when I started reporting 20 odd years ago on the environment, how important particularly the Arctic was, but also obviously Antarctica, to the whole climate story. So this picture was taken on the Greenland ice sheet. I've had a number of trips up there, 15 to the Arctic altogether, because I thought it was really important to track the changes, share them with audiences. What we've got next is a little video clip from my final BBC documentary. I left after COP26, and I wonder whether we can get this running and whether we'll even hear anything. Let's see. A lot of it's in the Arctic. It's only long. If there's no audio coming through, I'll give a running commentary as we do. So this is in Svalbard with the Norwegian Polar Institute. We were doing stories about sea ice melting, the glaciers. That last shot was Greenland. This is again with the NPI. They parked their icebreaker up in the Arctic ice. And again, the whole angle for me was, what does the Arctic change mean for other parts of the world? Again, here, the edge of the Greenland ice sheet. Of course, there's a little bit of other climate consequences in different parts of the world. By the way, the audio is quite dramatic. It's a pity we can't hear it, but we've got too much other sound. Obviously, the driver is fossil fuels, but I try to raise a sense of hope. New technologies, particularly renewables, the rise of offshore wind, kind of giving us a sense of hope. This is with the American Coast Guard over Alaska. They did this amazing thing for us of opening the back door of a C-130 so that we could get a shot from there. It's just really to illustrate the fact that, for me, polar change has been an enormous part of my own story. This is at Rothera, the British Antarctic Survey base down on the Antarctic Peninsula. A few thumbs in the air there of approval. An absolutely wonderful time, because actually the main thing for me was on TV, and this was a rare, I think possibly the first live TV broadcast into the BBC's flagship News at 10 from Antarctica, from this particular base, on a very, very shaky internet connection, but we managed it. The great thing was you could look really rugged, like a polar explorer on TV, and then go back to the wonderfully centrally heated building and have a huge dinner, and then stay the night in a really comfortable room. One of the things they do at Rothera is insist on taking you down a crevasse. That was a mind-blowing experience, having to learn how to abseil and then deal with the amazing beauty of being in this ice cavern where the light comes not just down from the top, but from the sides and underneath. And what was meant to be a 20-minute crevasse training session, my cameraman and I were just blown away by it and spent several hours down there because we loved it so much. But as I say, I guess the main focus has been the north. This is the edge of the Greenland ice sheet. Some of you will know this. This is Kangerlussuaq. You can just drive up the road to the edge of the ice sheet. And actually, the nice thing for climate communication is that you've got edge of the ice sheet and a bloody great violent torrent of meltwater at the bottom. And if you needed any better way of explaining ice melting, water running into the ocean, you can't really find it. One of my first trips to Greenland was to the far south of it, and I was with a team from the Danish Geological Survey, and we went to the one edge of the ice sheet by helicopter. And actually, this was 2004, so a long time ago. And back then, I was quite struck by how emotionally moved the scientists were about the scale of ice melting. Actually, it seemed to me that there was plenty of ice. I couldn't really see what the problem was. Huge ice cliffs, ice everywhere. It was quite tricky to walk around on. And something I was really, really keen to do was to go back to exactly the same spot 15 years later. So this is 2004. That's 2019. I say exactly the same spot. It's as near as we could get to the same spot. The significance was that we were walking on a lot of bare rock. Same time of year, by the way, late July. But the front of the glacier had not only retreated massively, but actually its height, its thickness had declined massively. And so I often just use this. If I'm talking to business leaders, talking to school kids, talking to all kinds of people who may be influential, I just think before and after. You know, often people have a difficult uncle who's read something on Facebook, like, oh, I read that the ice is getting thicker. Oh, there's a glacier growing somewhere, blah, blah, blah. I just say, I've seen it in the company of scientists who really know what they're talking about. I just like this picture. It's April off Svalbard, and there's something kind of amazing about the geometric patterns of the way the ice breaks up. So that's me. You've got someone who is a supporter of polar science, always trying to find new ways to explain it. And I think it's incredibly heartening that there's a generation now coming to the fore of people who want to carry on the amazing mission of understanding really what's happening. So look, let's bring to the front here our three amazing young polar scientists. We've got James Kirkham, we've got Arthi, Ramachandran, and in the middle there, Niraula, and we may be joined by someone whose name I need to be given, and I'm going to type that in here. Ximena Aguilar. Mexican. Okay. Fine. So whenever she comes here, there's room for her, and that's amazing. So look, I think just mainly because of the miking, it's easier if I stay up here. James, do you want to kick off just with kind of what you're doing? It says here that you've been working at the British Antarctic Survey. You're looking at understanding the past to predict the future. Just take a minute or two to tell us kind of what you're up to.
Thank you, David. So yeah, my name is James Kirkham, and I currently am just about to complete my PhD at the British Antarctic Survey and the University of Cambridge. I've worked on many things from both Antarctica to Svalbard and also in the Himalayas as well, in the high mountains there. I've been very lucky enough to go and conduct lots of fieldwork, also including Thwaites Glacier, which many of you might have heard about, as a rapidly changing glacier in West Antarctica. And
that's the Doomsday Glacier they all talk about, right? Thwaites.
That is what has been called the Doomsday Glacier, right. Yes. And I was there on a cruise 3 years ago. For the first time, really seeing this glacier up close. So we went right up to the carving line, the front of this huge glacier in Antarctica. And I remember being overwhelmed by the scale of it. So Thwaites is the widest glacier in the world, and we surveyed the entire front of it on a ship, and that took us an entire day sailing from one side to the other. So you hear about these things. Thwaites is about the size of the UK or Florida in terms of its absolute size, but until you're there and you see it in person, it's really hard to understand the full scale of this piece of ice. But my work is broadly using the past to understand the future. So I look at ice sheets that used to cover North America and Europe and then melted away. And as these glaciers and ice sheets deglaciated, they formed or left behind signatures of ice sheet decay. So, and we can use these signatures to understand how ice sheets today are going to respond to extreme climate warmth in the future.
Great, thank you very much indeed. Now, Arthi, you've got the mic already there. So Arthi is also doing a PhD at Concordia University in Montreal in Canada, and your research looks at microbes, which I kind of know a little bit about because I did do a story about algae flourishing in the melting of the ice sheet in Greenland, darkening the surface, accelerating the melting, and generally speeding the whole thing up. But let's hear what you're working on.
Yeah, hi, I'm Arthi Ramachandran. So like David was saying, I do work on microbes in the Arctic Ocean and how they're changing and evolving with climate change. And I think one thing that really sticks out to me is 98% of the biomass in the ocean is microbial, which is equivalent to about 240 billion elephants. Which is quite a large number when you think about it. And I think at times we kind of forget about microbes because we can't see them. But as kind of illustrated in some of the talks in the event before, microbes are really important for being the base of the food chain. They're providing nutrients that other organisms are eating and using to survive. And so I think it's really important to study them, see how they're changing. Are we going to see any cascading effects? With changes down there up to higher trophic level organisms. And so I'm just trying to understand, why are microbes changing? How are they changing? And what does that really mean to all of us? And so I've conducted my study mostly in the Canadian Arctic. Twice I've been on an expedition to the Beaufort Sea. And once I had the amazing opportunity to be in Cambridge Bay, Nunavut, in the communities, working with them, and trying to understand what's happening with climate change. And I think for me, that was the most beneficial experience because, we can study things at sea all we want, but until we understand how that's affecting actual communities and actual people, I think that's what really matters. And we need to work with them, have co-creative projects to make sure that we're addressing problems that they're facing. And I would, highly advocate for that.
That's great to hear because it builds on what we were hearing earlier and some of the questions that came up. Thank you for that. Bimo, also doing a PhD, Alfred Wegener Institute, University of Bremen. You're looking at sea ice, model uncertainty. Tell us more about what you're working on.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm Bimochan Niraula, or just Bimo. And like you mentioned, I am doing my PhD researching in the Alfred Wegener Institute. And so my work is focused on sea ice and how the extent of sea ice is represented by models in forecast and predictions, as well as how we're seeing it from satellite observations. So I spend a lot of time looking at observations of sea ice from different satellite-based instruments and trying to understand, first of all, how it has changed in the past few years and what kind of analysis we can make from this, but also how accurate are our predictions. And one thing that really strikes me is that the Arctic Ocean is a vast surface. It's a large area, used to be completely covered with ice, but since the 80s, we've lost almost half the ice when you think about like a summer extent. So that's a lot of sea ice that used to reflect sunlight back out of Earth, and the feedbacks associated with that are manifold, and it's a very serious issue. So this is what I'm focused on.
Great, and we'll hear more about that in a second. I'm really pleased that Ximena, you managed to join us. You've come from watching one of the sessions or something like that. Have you been in the thing.
Yeah. I mean,
okay.
yeah, attending these sessions, but I was in a meeting, so I came
Okay.
as fast as I could.
Well, it's great.
Yeah.
So look, do tell us a bit about yourself, what you're working on.
Sure. Well, I look at the interface between glaciers and the marine system. Actually, how the color of these areas is changing with regards to the presence of microalgae or components such as organic carbon. So I'm looking at these pathways, the transport of organic carbon from glaciers to the marine system, and how this might be reflected in the primary production of these very important sinks of CO2. But not just that, I'm quite interested in bringing all this information to the different publics, no? Because, I mean, it's not the general public. We conform like different communities, different interests. So I'm very keen on bringing all this information that we already have and to make changes happen, or at least to bring all this information so that people can reflect on this. And the way I'm doing this is through art, because I think that we sometimes, as scientists, perhaps we forget about that we are humans and we feel, and why not using all these feelings to bring up all these discussions and reflections. So I work with photography, bioptic sound, to bring all this information to reflect on this and try to not just make people understand it, but feel it, really feel it, and yeah, to push action.
That's so interesting, because quite often there's a view sometimes in the world of science that art is a completely separate thing and perhaps a little bit flaky and uncertain, and science is about the hard data. But fascinating to hear you're trying to embrace both in part of your storytelling. I've got to ask you how you all kind of got into this, because I remember once in 2007, we joined a Canadian icebreaker sailing through the Northwest Passage. It was October. It was getting really cold. I remember asking a young postdoc, about how she'd got into this. And she said, actually, she'd had a point earlier in her career when she could have either studied coral in the Caribbean or gone up to the Arctic. I said, what the hell are you doing, missing the Caribbean? She said, actually, it's because it's changing so fast. She felt she could contribute more, that the science would be more valuable. Any of you, Bimo, tell us what got you into this, the ice? Was there a tipping point for you personally?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So actually, I was born and grew up in Nepal, and I've been in the mountains a little bit, and I've seen how the snow levels in the Himalayas are shifting already. And so this was always the thing that was in the back of my head, that okay, these things are actually disappearing as we speak in this time and period. So when I had the opportunity to actually start studying, I was already sure that I wanted to study something that is related to climate change and climate sciences. But then, like you just mentioned, I realized that these spaces in the Arctic, these sea ice landscapes, they're not going to be there in the next 30, 40 years probably. And if things get worse, even earlier. So this actually really motivated me to both get a chance to see them and study them and try to understand them, and actually see if I can somehow be involved in learning more about them, finding more about them, but also rescuing them if possible at all.
That's so interesting. And Arthi, what was it for you that to this
About marine oceans and marine science, and
but you could have gone for a warmer ocean.
yeah, I could have gone for a warmer ocean, but I think being in Canada, I wanted to, I guess, contribute to helping create change, within my own country. And for me, like you said, the Arctic is rapidly warming. The Arctic, is changing so fast, but also I kind of wanted to change the way science is done in the Arctic, and not just be kind of that fly in, fly out scientist, but rather maybe hopefully be able to work with communities and change the way that settlers have kind of in the past worked with Indigenous communities. And so I did want to hopefully contribute to a a better path forward. And so that also was one of the reasons that I chose the Arctic. It did kind of happen, you know, serendipitously. I was working with someone who happened to be working in the Arctic, and of course things like that happen. But I think what kept me was the human aspect.
Really interesting. And Ximena, you've explained, you know, how a big part of your work in this area is thinking about how to explain it, the storytelling. Did you have a moment when you were younger, when you suddenly thought, yeah, that's what I've got to do?
Yeah, you know, I was born in Mexico City. It's one of the most populated cities in the world, and actually,
And also with terrible air, right? Awful air pollution problem.
yeah, it is. And I mean, we don't have like green areas. It's just like a huge mass piece of concrete. So I was quite interested in for example, how we could find these spots of nature in this like huge island of concrete. So I was always quite interested in the language of nature. What was nature telling us? No, these small green spots in the city. What they were telling us. So I also understood that everything was connected. So I wanted to go further. I was as well quite interested in the ocean. So I started doing some research, and then I found out that the Southern Ocean was quite important from the whole system of the ocean in the world. So that's why I chose the Antarctic. And through my like early career in my master's, I went to Punta Arenas, and that was the very first time. When I was 27, I saw for the very first time a glacier, and you cannot imagine the impact that had on me. It completely changed me.
Well, just seeing
deeply,
the ice.
just to see it,
Yeah.
just to hear it, to feel it. I don't know, people from here who have been in these areas, you can feel the breath of the glacier, literally. So that completely transformed me. And I thought, how can we bring this breath of glaciers to the people so they can love them, they can like protect them really from the heart. So that's why I'm super interested in bringing all these voices, this breath to everyone. Yeah.
That's great. There was that amazing project, wasn't there, where some glaciologists put a microphone in a glacier in Iceland, and you could just click on the thing on the link and just hear the sound of this living, breathing structure. James, did you have a moment? Did you have a sort of a eureka moment, as it were? We thought, this is what I want to do, and this is why.
I think there was.
And we're back in competition mode with whoever they are next door. Yeah, be as loud as you want.
Overwhelm them. For me, there wasn't a particular moment, but I mean, who would not want to work on one of the most pressing issues of our time? I think going to these places, seeing how the changes are happening now and affecting people within our lifetimes will only get worse within future generations and our children and our grandchildren. I think that really pushes you to try and achieve an impact here in some small way to make life better for billions of people around the world.
So, let's talk a little bit about what you make of COP27. Have you been to a COP4?
No, it's actually my first time.
Okay. So, I mean, the old cliche is that progress is glacial, but actually glaciers are moving quite fast these days. I mean, just what's your sense of having been here a day or two?
It's been really interesting to be here and speaking to people. I think this particular pavilion is fantastic because we can point towards the data and the science, say these are the facts, this is what's happening now, and we know what our future scenarios are going to be. I think almost every single person I've spoken to, whether that's observers, lobbyists for industry, or in delegates in the policy negotiations, have had an awareness of this issue, and that's been fantastic to see. And the question for me really is that if these people are aware these things are happening, then why is the progress not more rapid? And I think this is really the question I'm kind of grappling with right now.
I think a lot of people are grappling with it, and I was appalled and amazed to learn that the negotiations on the agenda for COP27, running up to when it launched on Sunday, took 40 hours. I mean, that was partly because of particular difficult issues, but nevertheless, it's just an indication, really, of how difficult it is. Ximena, what's your sense? I mean, there's an urgency in your voice about your work, your passion for it. And then kind of in a way here, it's nearly 200 nations. Sometimes, I mean, I've known this is my 11th COP. They argue over semicolons. They argue over, particular words for days on end. What's your sense about whether this process is actually delivering the change that everybody here agrees is needed?
Yeah, this is my second COP. My first
Okay.
one was last year in Glasgow, and it was completely overwhelming because, we have, all these voices, and we have to make like really fast decisions. And I think that we sometimes think too complicated. I think we just have to sit and listen, really, really listen. What are the needs of everyone, and try to look for a like simple solution, which is we all need to collaborate. We have no time left, and of course, all of us have different situations, priorities, but the main priority right now is protecting life and human lives. All the species, of course. But I think that we have to step back, just make a pause, and really understand that we are in a stage that we have to collaborate and really move forward, because otherwise we will have a really, really bad time. I mean, we're already having it. Look what happened in Pakistan. We cannot continue this way.
No, and Nigeria right now.
Yeah, exactly. We cannot. I mean, how can we continue this way? So yeah, that's what I would say.
I think a really striking thing for me as someone from a generation or two ahead of you is that most of the climate models run out to 2100. That's been the basic one. You showed a few that go a bit further, but in the main they go to 2100. And I guess that's for all kinds of reasons of physical constraints and feasibility and computing power and so forth. Now, if you're my age, I won't be around in 2100. It's not really, it's a deep personal problem in a sense for me because I've got kids. But you guys will be around, I would hope, to 2100. And there are people being born now who will be living into the next century. And so it's no longer kind of theoretical or rather abstract. I'm wondering, Bimo, whether you feel this quite acutely, that, until now, the modeling work, the projections, all of the angles about climate have been out to what for my generation are sort of impossibly distant periods of time. But this is your life.
Yeah, so I really like what you said earlier about this climate action being a glacial, slow process. But just like you pointed out, like glaciers are moving fast, right? So they're moving slow until they're not. Then there's a watershed moment when things actually come in action. And I think for a lot of people in our generation, that moment has already come. We're all aware action needs to be taking place. Change has to happen now. And there has to be a systematic shift towards a better system. However, we're not the ones in power. And the people in power, they're the ones who are in there talking right now, making negotiations. And for them, the perspective is entirely different. It's more about what's going to happen money-wise or financially in the coming years. So I understand like people want to see these model projections going beyond 2100, but even the projections that are going up to 2100, the scenarios they're showing are already really bad, and we're not taking those into account. We're not taking those into consideration. So for sure, I think we should be building better. We should be doing better projections for further scenarios as well, but that requires a lot of computing cost, and we're trying to do this in a very systematic, very proper way so that there is no doubt about it. And I think these things are going to come out soon, but there's already so much information, so much knowledge about what is going to happen in the next 50, 60 years, and that is already scary enough that we should be using that to take action right now.
I mean, that's so interesting because 20 years ago or so, until maybe 15, 10 years ago, in some of these discussions, you'd hear 2 degrees described as a kind of safety limit. That was it's a rather arbitrary number, but that was what the diplomats and ministers said, we've got to limit the rise to 2 degrees, the 2-degree safety limit. And it was always a problem for the second half of the century. And I wonder, Arthi, whether you know, we're living on a planet that's 1.1, 1.2 degrees hotter than it was 150 years ago. And we're kind of seeing, particularly this year, really what that means. And so when people say, oh, well, we're going to struggle to keep it to 1.5, and we know what we know about 1.1, and that if you look at the projections, we're on course for what? Oh, well, 2.4, 2.8, 3. I mean, let's hope to God the really wild scenarios don't happen. But what's that mean for you personally when you come to an event like this, that we're in it already?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, actually. And one of the other hats that I wear is I'm a science policy analyst for the Canadian federal government. So I've moved towards trying to take my science background and everything that I know and help create more evidence-based policy making and push kind of for change, because you know it is our life right now, and I have a 2-year-old, and you know I'd like to have a really good future for him as well. So for me, it's not just my life, but making sure that my son's life is going to be better. And I think that coming to COP is a really interesting, exciting experience. This is my first one, and I would love to see negotiations happen more and have that sense of urgency that us, I guess, youth have, right? We know that we've reached this tipping point. If we don't do anything, you know, the world is going to kind of fall apart. And, you know, it's going to be the most vulnerable populations that are facing it right now. This isn't tomorrow's problem. It's a yesterday's problem. And so I think hopefully, you know, more scientists can push for policies to move forward, more evidence-based policies. And I think as we kind of contribute more to that, we can hopefully see a faster change and hopefully a more hopeful future.
So for all of you, let's talk about fossil fuels. I mean, you all come from countries that either, well, definitely use fossil fuels, perhaps not in the case of Nepal in terms of production of fossil fuels. Well, I mean, the UK produces fossil fuels, certainly Canada does, and Mexico, big oil producer, right? Now, the Ukraine invasion, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, has kind of upset the chessboard. And so people have been scrambling around for new sources of gas, new sources of oil. Prices for those two fuels have gone up, which means there's an incentive for businesses to get more of them. Coal is fashionable again, despite everything we know about coal. What does that mean for you? Talk us through, Ximena. Hey, and also let's just throw in the awkward fact that we all got here with the help of fossil fuels. How do we get ourselves off fossil fuels when there's money to be made? And for the moment, they're really, really useful.
Yeah, well, to me, it's quite a complex question, because my country is dealing with lots of problems. I mean, we have these cartels things that we are actually dealing really, I mean, we have a huge problem with that. So in order to resolve this issue with fossil fuels, it's not straightforward. So it's quite complex to speak about this with policymakers in Mexico. Because we have some other pressing problems. So how can, for example, other countries from the north, how can they ask for a decrease of these activities when, I mean, we're one of the most important countries with regards to fossil fuels, but still there are some other countries that produce much more of these gases. So I don't know. It's, to me, to be honest, it's quite a complex question, because I mean, I lived in Mexico for 26 years, and I know the problems that we're facing. Just the violence is you cannot live safely. So how can you go to people with policymakers and make all these other problems like in the second place of the list of problems that we're facing? So it's I don't know. We have huge problems coming from all ways.
I mean, it's
so
definitely
all
difficult.
Directions, so.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not expecting an obvious answer because it is difficult. And James, I wonder what, I mean, we often hear that, you know, young people, and you sense this from what I'm hearing from the four of you, you know, there's a frustration, you're impatient to see rapid change. I'm wondering, James, right at the moment, there's a whole flurry of young people in the UK so angry about what's happening, nothing happening here, no one understanding the science, that they're blocking motorways. They just want to create disruption to really make a point, which is to express the fact that nothing is happening at the correct speed. But that disruption has the risk of a backlash. People saying, hang on, we've got to get to work or whatever. James, I wonder what your thoughts are about that.
I think I kind of disagree. I think there is an obvious solution right now, and this is that this particular situation provides us with a unique opportunity to get behind renewables and really push these alternative energy sources, invest in them at a rate we've never seen before. Not only to achieve energy security and to combat these global issues, but this will have the compound impact of actually addressing these other climate issues as well. We have the money, we have the incentives, and to really push in the technological innovation here and to use this really as a moment to make a fundamental change in how we power our countries, our economies, our growth, and make this a new green moment to choose a green future.
To really accelerate.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. Bimo, what's your thought about that? I mean, I'm not really asking if you sort of sympathize with people taking direct action, but just really what your sense of frustration is. How do we kind of move on? What your contemporaries all think?
Yeah, so I think the sense of frustration is very understandable. It's not just that we are extracting oil from the existing sources. It's not just that we're moving oil from the existing pipelines, but there's still countries and industries are still trying to build new sources of oil, new sources, new pipelines, new coal mines, and that's just so sad. When we know the science, when we've seen this happening, when we've learned about this, and when we see all the extreme weather events all around the world. I mean, the past years, I was trying to make a list of all the floods that were happening. I think I got almost all the countries in that list.
Right.
So it's really bad. So I think that's the source of frustration for all the young generation right now. And I think, like Ximena said, it's not always a very easy answer for poorer countries to get rid of all of their fossil fuels. It's definitely not easy for us to reach everywhere without fossil fuels. So fossil fuels will continue to be a part of our life, a part of our society until we have better technology. But if we never move towards that, we never try to have that ambition, we're never going to get that technology, right? So that's a
really interesting perspective. Are there questions? I mean, it'd be lovely to see if there's a question about any aspect of this. Yeah, there we go. Michael, grab the...
I was just curious what your perspective is. David alluded earlier to the fact that your generation and generations coming after you are going to inherit the problem. And it's a problem that you didn't make. And bluntly, it's a problem that people of my generation and before made, especially in the West where I live. How do you feel towards us? How do you feel towards our generation? Do you feel resentful? Have an animosity towards us that you're kind of suppressing? How do you feel towards us about this?
Who would like to pick that up? Anyone older here will just run away quite soon. But anyway, that would be understandable.
Sure, yeah, I can start. Yeah, I think there's frustration, a lot of frustration, because the people who are at the big tables are of the older generation, and they're the ones making these decisions. But there seems to be this lack of foresight in terms of, this is a long-term thing, and it's like, I want to talk about negotiations and 4 years from now, 5 years from now, but that's not good enough. So there's that frustration that we can't be at those tables to advocate for ourselves. So I think that's there. I think maybe a bit of animosity, of course, but I think that at least for myself, it's mostly just frustration that we can't seem to have that actual seat at a table, not that tokenistic, oh, the youth voice, yeah, we agree with you, blah, blah, but the actual like, hey, you know what, we've done research, we are all just as well educated, we've seen all of these problems, at the forefront, so why can't we also be there?
I'm just going to name drop for a moment, but once I interviewed David Attenborough, and he said one of the sources of optimism for him was, luckily there's a young generation that really gets it and wants to take action, and how inspiring that was. And I put that point when I interviewed Greta Thunberg, and she said, what does he mean? We're not in power. It's the older guys who are in power. Ximena, what do you reckon about that?
Well, to be honest, I don't feel resentful. I think that we're in such an amazing time in humanity. I mean, of course, we have like this dark side of everything, but in the end, I think, for example, look at us. We're in this huge gathering of multiple countries, and I think that now, I mean, I'm super grateful because I'm here and I can hear to the problems of people right on the other side of where I was born. So I think that we as a young people, we have learned such an important lesson not to follow that path. So we know that, and we know how well, the power of people, the power of working hand in hand with our partners, with our colleagues, and really learn to listen. I think it's something that we have forgotten. We have to listen. So to me, this is such a beautiful time, a very important moment in human history, and we have to move forward, but always together, collectively. So I think that this is such an amazing time to live in. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe just to add a little bit on that, I think there is some resentment, there is some anger, there's some not hostility, but there's a lot of frustration, but it's not personal. It's more against the system. And I think this hyper-capitalism, this shareholder profit, money above everything is definitely a lot of young people are really frustrated with this and how this has been adopted by society as the prime mantra. And also I want to say, like, I don't necessarily blame the older generation. I mean, I feel like I'm one of the older generation when we look at Greta Thunberg or one of the younger activists. It's also some complacency because you didn't know better. We didn't know better. I would have flown as much as I wanted if I had not learned about this 10 years ago. So I think this is something that, as we know now, as we know better, we got to change. And as Ximena already mentioned, there is some, like, we're not the ones in power, and the ones in power are not changing it. So that's the real source of frustration.
I think one of the most inspiring aspects of young generation of researchers like yourselves is, you're not limited by the sense of restrictions or, oh, that can't be done. So I'd like to ask each of you, if you had basically unlimited resources, if you were in charge of some amazing department or institute with whatever you need at your disposal to do the science you're doing, what would it look like? What would you have? Helicopters, ships, submarines, armies of whatever. Ximena, give that. Tell us what, and tell us why. What would you want to find out, and what would you need to do that in an unlimited, wonderful world?
Wow. I think that if I had unlimited resources, I think I would have this huge department on research, a polar research, but also combined with art, completely together. Because I think that it is very hard to really deeply protect something if you don't have feelings towards these like landscapes. So I think that in the moment that we really understand that we are not humans and nature, but we are part of a whole thing, I think that if we really understand, at the moment that we really understand that and have feelings towards these landscapes, I think that we would not hurt them. We would not have activities, or we won't, do anything negative to these these areas. And also, I think it's quite important that scientists also develop this human part of. I mean, we're humans, we're scientists, but we're humans. So why not explore this humanity to be more creative? Because science is as well about being super creative. So yeah, I think I would do that.
So I'm really looking forward to coming to the future university where that actually happens. James, what would you're about to set off to West Antarctica. You've been there before. I mean, just conjure up, feel completely free to maximize resources, to answer the burning questions that you've got.
I think one of the biggest questions we have right now are these events which are high impact but potentially low likelihood, or potentially we don't know how likely they actually are to occur. And so I think if I had a lot of resources, I would invest in models and observations which would carefully constrain how much sea level rise we could have, how much climate impact, and how fast this will come, and then do tailored risk assessments for each individual country about how this might play out at different timescales. And this would allow the different countries to adapt to these changes which will occur in the future.
Does that mean more of you, as it were? Does it mean more research vessels, helicopter? I don't know.
I think this means a real hybrid approach. So not only do we need more science, we need more model investment as well. And we need people who can connect with local communities around the world who might not necessarily understand what's going to happen in the future, how climate change affects them. Like, one question we often get asked is that why should I care about the polar regions if I live near the equator?
Yeah.
And of course, actually, the changes that happen at the poles don't stay there. They affect the whole world.
Billions of people living elsewhere.
Billions of people.
That's an amazingly powerful thought. Bimo, give me your quick wish list. What would what's your vision and what do you need?
Yeah, my quick wish list, if I had unlimited power, is I wish there would be a change in the whole system. So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, and Arthi, last word to you, because we're right on the end of our session here. And I just love the sense of possibility of your generation. Imagine unlimited resources. You're in charge of some huge university research institute. Conjure up what you would do with it and why.
I think what's really important is, I think, capacity building. We live in a global world. A lot of science is being done in Western areas, but there's so much capacity everywhere. So many people willing or wanting to learn and being unable to. And so I would like to hopefully provide the opportunity for everyone to be able to research whatever they would like, food systems, agriculture, polar areas, what's affecting them regionally, of course, will also affect everyone globally. So to be able to kind of do regional work for a common global goal and be able to have that global education. And, of course, when I say education, I don't just mean, Western education, but rather all indigenous
for
education,
everybody.
All ways of knowing.
Fantastic. Thank you all very much. We all wake up in the morning wondering how the day is going to go. And I think we could all agree that an hour of inspiration from you four makes it a very, very good day indeed. Would you all join me in thanking James, Arthi, Bimo, and Ximena? I think if they were in charge, we'd crack it. Well done. Thank you very much indeed.
And thank you for hosting us here.
Hey, no, it's been a great pleasure. Genuinely, thank you. I've had a great time. Thank you.